Command and conditional edges are two ways which we can use, which you, an agentic developer, can use to route information in a LangGraph agent. Say, for example, you have node A, you have node B, and then you have node C. Now, in some cases, you would want to push information to node B, or you would want control to go from node A to node B. And in some instances, you would want information to go from node A to node C. Now, if this is regular Python, you could just use an if statement. But how do you do that in LangGraph? Okay, so let's take a look at a quick example of how we can do this. I have set up everything using Jupyter. You're free to do that. You can even use Google Colab for this purpose. I've set this up through UV. Again, you're free to use Conda, you're free to use Pep, you can use anything that you would like. I'm using LangChain predominantly because it integrates really well with LangGraph, but you're free to use any other framework or use any other interface of interacting with the foundational model or the LLM. But I believe that at least to start out with, LangChain would be easier. Now, I'm using GPT-5 Mini purely because it's cheap and it's simple. And the other thing is that I have set my max tokens to 1024. It's a bit overkill for this purpose, but I like having a lot more tokens. Now, the structure of the agent that we will be building is really simple. I will be asking it to provide me either a joke or I'll be asking it for a poem. And based on what the user inputs, in this case, what you would be inputting or what I would be inputting, it would go to either joke, it would give us either a joke or a poem. Let's take a quick look at this. So we have command and we have the nodes. So you import command, it is a type in LangGraph. And we will come back to the definition where we go over the type hints, but we will look at how this node works. So we start with the input from the user where we say, would you like a poem or a joke? Now, if the user enters joke, or if you enter joke for that matter, we then pass it to a command which decides which is the node, or rather, which is the next node this information is going to go to. So the key operative here is go to, which specifies what is the output node type. Now, just keep in mind that when you add a node in LangGraph, this value should tally. And that is why in the type hint, we specify that command, that the output of this node is going to be of the command type, and it can have two values. It's either going to be joke value or the poem value. Now, we will see this in a little more detail when we start adding the nodes to the graph, but at this point, it is sufficient to understand this much. The other argument to command is the update value. Now, as all of you are aware, anytime control goes through a node and control needs to go out of the node, you are updating the state graph. Now, if you are using reducer function, that is taken care of. If not, this state is going to be overwritten by what is provided by the end of the node, rather by the node after it has finished processing what it needs to process. So that is what is going to be passed in as the value to the update parameter here. Now, in this case, the state is really simple. We just have messages. There's nothing more than that. So that is why we can just return messages and we can pass in the human message. This is what we or you would have entered. And it has the reducer function of add messages. So we can take a look at that. If you're not sure what a reducer function is, you can go through one of my earlier videos, or there are a lot of other videos that you can check online. But basically it just allows us, the developer, to be a bit lazy, and it gives the option of appending whatever is the output back into the message list, or whatever is the list that we have used previously. So we have messages here. Now let's look at the condition. Let's look at the actual routing that happens. So if the user enters joke here as the input, which we're just using simple Python's input here, if it is joke, then we are going to return this specific message which says, tell me a joke about water bottles. And it goes to the joke node. If not, it says, compose a 2-line poem on water bottles. And it goes to that poem. And it goes to the node which is the poem node. Now let's look at the nodes. We have the joke node, which is really straightforward. We get the response where we tell the LLM, say, hey, listen, this is my previous state of messages. Now give me a response. Now the joke node and the poem node are identical. There's no difference here, but for the sake of demonstration, they will be, we are splitting them into two nodes. Ideally, when you're building agents in production or for your own side projects, you would be having some different set of nodes here. It's perfectly fine. It's not a problem. This is just for demo purposes. Now, let us run it up to here. We reset the kernel. We are running it. We build the graph. Now, let us take a look at the same notebook in a different view so that we can see what was the values that we have given in command and what are the values for the actual nodes that we're adding to the graph. So I like to have two views for the same notebook. Both of them are the same, so I can compare one section of the notebook against something else. I just find this to make my workflow a lot easier. Okay, so we have the definition of welcome node here, and we have the actual nodes here that we're adding. So we have welcome node, which corresponds to this. We have joke node, which is what we are expecting here from this command. And then we have the poem node, which is again what we expect from the second command. So let's add this. We have added it. Now, the interesting thing is when we add an edge, we are adding an edge from start to welcome. This is what is expected. But if you observe carefully, we don't have any edge from welcome to the joke node or to the poem node. We just have edges from joke to the end and poem to the end. Now this is because we are using the command tool here, and command takes care of setting up the edge for us. So we as an agent developer, or you as an agent developer, you need not have to do this explicitly. This is something that is taken care of. And because we have added the respective output type, this is a type hint, when we compile and visualize the graph, this will be shown, this will be visible. So let's walk through that. As you can see, we have an edge from welcome to joke and welcome to poem, even though we have not explicitly added anything here. Now let's call this joke. Would you like a poem or a joke? Let's start with a joke. As you can see, it has routed to the joke node because it has printed this line. Right. There are a few jokes here. Why was the water bottle always calm? Because it knew how to go with the flow. Really? I told my water bottle a secret. It promised it wouldn't spill it. Uh, I tell bad jokes. This is worse than my jokes. Why did the water bottle get hot in the car? That I'm feeling a little steamed. My jokes are really bad. This is worse than that. Do not ask GPT-5 Mini for jokes, people. Let's see if poems are better. I would prefer a poem this time, sir. Plastic blue or glass clear, a private lake for the day, one hand, one breath, the world steadies, sip by sip. Now, I don't know if this is a good or a bad poem. Just because I don't understand it, I'm going to say it's a good poem, but I'll leave it up to you folks to decide. So I hope you have an idea now about how command works. And now let's take a look at how conditional edges work. Make this simple for all of us. Now, the difference between a conditional edge and a command is that in command, the node decided which was the next node that the information is going to flow to. That is not the case when you're using a conditional edge. When using a conditional edge, the node has no information, has no idea about where the information is going to go. It has no idea what the other nodes are. And that is something that you would have to decide when you're building it, whether you would want to use that flow or you wouldn't want to use that flow. We'll get to the pros and cons of both of these down the road, but at least at this point, that's a good understanding to keep in mind. Now, it is again even more straightforward. The welcome node only has the input from the user. Again, the same thing. Would you like a poem or a joke? And it just returns that. Again, the state is still the same as we had earlier, just messages, which has a reducer function. So we need not explicitly append it. Let's run this. Now, the joke node is also the same thing. It has no change. All it does is it takes in whatever state is provided, passes it through the LLM, prints out the response, and returns it. But you still need to handle routing. Command does it within the node, whereas when you're using a conditional edge, you need to code out the edge. You need to code out the routing function in a conditional edge, which looks surprisingly similar to that of another node. In fact, this threw me off the first time I was reading about this. So I'm calling it a router. You're free to call it anything that you want. There's no hard and fast rule here. The input is still the same. It takes in a state. But in this case, it doesn't know what is the previous node. There's no information there. All it knows is it's getting a state. So it is on you. The onus is on you, the agentic developer, to figure out what information you would want to use to route the flow in the agent. So in this case, since we know that it is coming from the welcome node or the node which has the user input, and there's only one value there, I'm confident that I can just take the last value, the last message, and I can check if if the word joke is there in that last message. So that is what is happening here. In line 4 of this node, I am taking the last message. I'm checking if there is if the word joke is present in that string, in that content. If it is, I am returning joke node. Keep this in mind. This is slightly different. We will come back to this in a while. That I am returning joke node and not joke that I had done during when I was using the command. Similarly, when we are routing to poem, I am returning poem node. Now, this is a slight difference where you will need to explicitly figure out from whatever state where you would want to route information to. Now let's run this. Let's build it. Yes, now this is where things get interesting. Now you see, I'm calling my node, my joke node as joke and my poem node as poem. However, I'm returning joke node here. Now, just keep in mind, this has nothing to do with these names here. In fact, let's make that change. Let's call this Joker node 1. And let's call this poem. There's no word like poemer. I don't know. Poets, yes. Poets, poet node 2. Okay. We are returning Joker node 1 and we're returning poet node 2. Let's build this. And you can see my nodes are still joke and poem. There's no difference here. And even here, when I add the edge, I am just adding joke to end, poem to end, and from start to welcome. Now, let's see how we add the conditional edge. To add a conditional edge, you would pass in the name of the starting node, the node from where information is coming out from. Then you would pass in your routing function or the function that acts as your conditional edge. Now, this last part is key. Now, earlier, we were returning Joker node 1. So this would be modified to Joker node 1. And this maps. Now, this mapping is important. The mapping from the output of the conditional function has to match the name of the node that it needs to map to or that it needs to route to. So this input here is going to be the output, one of the outputs from the conditional edge. And this value here has to match one of the nodes. If not, you're going to error out. Let's see, poet node 2. And we add the edges. We do not have an error. It works. Now let's compile. Let's visualize the graph. As you can see, we have slightly more information. So from welcome, we are going through Joker node 1, that is what the conditional edge returns, but LangGraph is mapping Joker node 1 to the joke node. Similarly, the router, or rather the welcome node just returns poem. The router, the conditional edge, takes a look at the last message and it routes it to poem node. to the poem node, but the conditional edge that it is returning is called poet node 2, and that is being mapped to poem by LangGraph. And finally, it terminates with end. So let's call this. Let's hope the jokes are better this time. Would you like a poem or a joke? Let's see, joke about, I don't know, what would be good? Trees this time. Okay, it goes through the router. It's routing to the joke node. It is in the joke node, and here are a few. What is happening? Yeah. Okay, here are a few jokes about trees. Why do trees have so many friends? Because they branch out. Okay, a little bit intellectual. What did the tree wear to the pool party? Swimming trunks. How do trees access the internet? They log in. That's nice. Why was the tree stumped? It couldn't answer. Oh my god. What did one oak say to the other? Aren't you glad we're. Okay, I really don't get this one. Why did the tree go to the dentist to get a root canal? Okay. What's a tree's least favorite month? My god. September. Ah, oh, good. At least it's a bit self aware. Right, now let's ask it for a poem. Uh, poem about. Let's just say poem. As you can see, it's routing. It's routed to the poem node. We are within the poem node. Hey, at the edge of evening. Yes, this is the middle of the night. I set down my shadow. What should learn the shape of the last night? Yeah, it's too late. I do not want to get philosophical at this point. But this covers the syntax and the working of conditional edges versus command. Now, the difference between them and why do we have two of these? Now, when you're using command, the node has explicit idea as to which are the nodes that it has to go to. And the other thing that it does is it is updating the state at the same point. So if you would want to update the state as well as route it to the next node, command is your option. If you do not want to update your state, you just want the router to decide where to go next, then you go with conditional edges. So these are your two ways of routing information. One is through command and one is through conditional edges. And I hope both of these have found interesting value or interesting use cases in your experiments and your agent building. I hope to see you soon again. Thank you.